The next talk, Green, coordinating a Windows 10 to Linux upcycling campaign across free software communities worldwide, will be translated from English to German. Our speaker is Joseph. He works for KDE Eco Initiative, focused on sustainability and eco design. He would like you to get inspired to think big and act boldly as a unified community by this talk, where he will tell you why extending hardware's operating life with free software is good for you and better for the environment. So give it up for Joseph.
Thank you. Thanks for coming so early in the morning. You can follow us on Mastodon at be4foss at floss.social. And all of our slides are available at the repository. Here's a QR code, or you can follow the link. Before we get started, I usually like to ask a couple of questions. Who here uses Windows or knows someone who uses Windows? Okay, most people in the room, good. Who here knows someone who continues to use their computer with an outdated operating system? Okay, you're in the right place. I want exactly you here. Okay, so I'm going to get started by presenting a little bit why this matters. Many of you may know the dog in a burning room meme, where the dog says, "This is fine." The cartoon artist updated the comic shortly after that with a version in which this is not fine. And the dog, as you see here, realizes the room is on fire, screams, "This is not fine. Oh my God, everything's on fire. What the hell is my problem?" We are in that situation now. We are in a climate crisis. Here are some headlines just from the past year. This is from April, when the Antarctic reached almost 40 degrees Celsius. It's the coldest place on the Earth. Ocean temperatures are shattering records. There are several reasons for this. One is that regulations have now removed other cooling emissions, and we might be seeing the actual effects of CO2 and CO2 equivalents on the atmosphere. It's every year getting higher and higher. It was the hottest summer on record this year. This will be probably the coolest summer that people born today experience, or born this year experience. It's probably going to be the coolest winter they experience. And we've let it go on for a very long time. Okay? So this is continuing of that comic. Oh my God, Jesus fuck, what the fuck was I even thinking? There was no reason to let it last this long and get this bad. We've known about this problem for a very long time. The first research on carbon emissions and the effect that it has on the environment was from the mid-1800s in 1856 by Eunice Newton Foote. This is an article from 1912, so over 100 years ago, from Popular Mechanics, in which they state adding CO2 tends to make the air a more effective blanket for the Earth and to raise its temperature. This effect may be considerable in a few centuries. We are now a little over a century later, and it is considerable. Here is a graphic from the Show Your Stripes campaign, in which they show the temperature relative to the average from 1960 to 2010, and how it changes over time. And as you can see, it's going up, and it continues to go up. Okay, we're at a hacker conference. What does this have to do with hardware, software? Well, the ICT sector is a major contributor to CO2 emissions. This is from a report from the Association for Computing Machinery from 2022. And they did a meta-analysis of various studies trying to estimate the CO2 emissions from the ICT sector. And the lowest averages around 2% of CO2 emissions, of entire CO2 emissions, to 4% in the worst estimates. This is roughly comparable to the aviation industry. Many people know the aviation industry contributes a lot of CO2 emissions. Many people don't think about the contributions of ICT. These estimates include everything from machine learning to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, as well as things like the number of devices being used and produced every year. If nothing changes, it's estimated that by 2050, about 1/3 of CO2 emissions will be coming from the ICT sector. So what I want to talk about today is the environmental harm of this produce, use, dispose approach to computing. And I'm going to focus mostly on where software meets hardware. And I'm going to talk about it in two different ways. That's the energy demands that software has on hardware, or that the software drives from the hardware, as well as the energy and CO2 emissions in production. And I'm going to look at each of these separately. So I'm going to start with usage. This is looking mostly at inefficiencies in computing. And this isn't necessarily about improvements in the software or new functionality being added, but rather inefficiency in the software design itself. And an example of this comes from a Umweltbundesamt, or German Environment Agency study, in which they compared various software products doing the exact same thing. So these are usage scenario scripts that are emulating user behavior for different software, and then looking at how much energy is consumed across those different computer programs. And what you see here are just two of the software products that they compared. A word processor. They don't identify them other than saying one is an open source software product and the other is a proprietary. You can probably guess which programs these are. And you can see here that the proprietary software product consumes 4 times the energy to do the exact same thing compared to the open source one. I'm going to come back to this a little bit later and look at some of what's happening over time to drive this energy consumption. Now, for a single user, this may not be a big deal. I mean, this isn't that much if you just look at one person, but you have to scale this up. Every university, every office, every home has a word processor in it. Those are being used for the entire working day, your study life, etc. And this is an example taken from a researcher, Detlev Toms, in which there's just a 10 watt-second increase, which is about a 1 CPU second increase in a process. If you multiply that out by 1.5 million users, which isn't that many users, and you assume this increase is relevant 20 times a day for 230 working days a year, you're talking about 19 megawatt hours of energy consumption. That's about the equivalent of driving an electric vehicle from Paris to Shanghai and back 6 times. And this is for a single CPU second increase. Now, that's only 1.5 million users and one very simple change. If you can imagine doing several of these changes and multiplying that out by billions of users, you're easily talking about the energy consumption of entire cities. Okay, so inefficiencies in computing are driving environmental harm. So is the disposal of our devices. In 2015, Achim Steiner from the United Nations Environmental Program referred to a tsunami of e-waste rolling out over the world. In 2016, we produced about 45 million metric tons of e-waste. If you were to make Eiffel Towers out of that material, you could build 4,500 Eiffel Towers. And it's only increasing. 2022 was about 62 million metric tons. It's estimated by 2030 it'll be 82 million metric tons. The World Economic Forum says that e-waste is the fastest growing waste stream in the world. And it has huge environmental impacts. So this is a statue, many of you may know this, is the WE person, the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment person. It's an awareness-raising campaign related to the directive that was adopted in the EU in the early 2000s. This is built out of the e-waste for the average British citizen's device generation over a lifetime. So I think it was 3.3 tons of e-waste, and the statue goes about 7 meters tall. So when our e-waste doesn't become art, it ends up in landfills in some cases. In landfills, it only makes up 2% of the waste, but it's 70% of the toxic waste. When it ends up in a treatment center, like this one here in Ghana, this is in Agbog Bloshi, which is one of the biggest e-waste recycling centers in the world. It, in the best case, pollutes the air, soil, and water. In the worst case, is poisoning the people working there, as well as the people living downstream and the animals. This is a picture from what are called burners. This is when they burn the cables to get the copper out of them. And this is particularly destructive. Okay, so that's disposal. And now if we want to look at production. So when you dispose your device, you buy a new one. And this is probably the worst environmental impact in terms of CO2 emissions of everything we've talked about so far. The production has a disproportionate contribution of the CO2 emissions over a device's lifetime. So this is first looking at the energy consumption estimated by the International Energy Agency. The ICT sector uses about 8 to 9% of the total energy. And of that, half of the energy is just in manufacturing. If you focus in on the individual devices, this is an interesting graph looking at the proportion of CO2 equivalents by device. Blue is usage, orange is production. And you can see here that in all cases, production is roughly 75+%, in some cases almost 100% of the CO2 emissions over that device's lifetime. That embodied carbon, when you discard a device, means that you've wasted all of the CO2 for nothing, right? You're now producing a new device and contributing even more CO2. A German Environment Agency study from 2012 tried to look at what is that sweet spot when replacing an old, inefficient device is worth it. And what they find, assuming a 10% increase in energy efficiency, that the replacement of the older device can only be justified after 33 to 89 years. Okay? How many people use computers that are 30 years old? Anyone here? How many people use computers that are 20 years old? Yeah? How many people use computers that are 10 years old? Okay, good. You guys are ahead of the average. There are also huge social costs related to device production, including human rights violations. So this is a picture from an article about the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, which is a directive to make sure that companies are responsible for their supply chains, which I think if it were really enforced would mean probably no smartphones could be sold because, for example, cobalt mining often uses child labor. In places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So device production is a huge aspect of this. Okay, so now we're going to focus on what exactly does software have to do with this. So software design can contribute to devices being less efficient, can contribute to the devices being used up and worn down more quickly because you're using it more, as well as then you have to throw that device away and get a new one. You might have seen a warning, or maybe your friends or family device doesn't meet the minimum system requirements because the demands of that software are getting higher and higher. Or you might have planned obsolescence, like this device is no longer supported. And the result is that you have unnecessarily high energy consumption, new device, or functioning devices discarded as e-waste, and you're producing and shipping new devices. So let's go back to this comparison here and think about where some of that is coming from. This is actually from a talk from the 36 CCC in 2019. And this is a graph looking at that same energy consumption of the two software products, but now you have the power on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And I'm going to focus here on the moment when the document is saved. That's that blue line there. And what you can see here is that the open source software product, after the command has been given to save, there's a bit of a spike to then perform that action, and then it goes idle. In the proprietary software product, you see that the software keeps doing things. They don't say what it's doing in the report that this comes from, but I can imagine it's something like telemetry. It doesn't have to be, but it could be. This kind of software design is typical in many of the proprietary products that we use. They are tracking us and analyzing us for their own purposes. This isn't necessarily for you. It might be in some cases, but in most cases, it's for their own benefit. This kind of ad and tracking has a huge energy profile. This is from a study looking at the energy consumption of unwanted data use in the EU. This is an estimate of the energy consumed from ads and tracking that users would opt out of if they could, but they can't. And what they find, so there's about 60% of respondents said that they would opt out of ads and tracking. And just in the EU, that energy consumption would be about the energy consumption of a small city like Lisbon or Turin in 1 year. Okay, and this is for something that people don't want. And then you have planned obsolescence and abandonware for software driving e-waste. This is an example from Mac OS. This is Intel chips are slowly being phased out from the new releases of their operating system. The newest operating system is already phasing out devices, Intel chip devices from 2019, 2020. That means they'll get another year or two of security updates, and then those will become e-waste. These are computers that are 6 years old. They're still functioning. It's good hardware. And this is a software issue. Consumers seem to be aware of this problem, but not a solution. This is from a Eurobarometer poll in which they asked people about their usage of digital devices and found that many people would like to use their devices for at least 5 years. And their reasons for purchasing a new device are related to a performance decrease, which in many cases will be a software issue, or applications stop working. Now, all those people who raise their hand that know people that use out-of-date operating systems, they've probably had those people who use those operating systems after security updates have stopped. They will no longer be able to keep using their software. I imagine this is happening in this case. They don't say that, but I can imagine that's one of the reasons that their software has stopped working on their old device. So free software is a solution. And the reason is because free software, with its user autonomy and transparency inherent to the software by design, allows it to be repaired and extended to do new things. That means you can interrupt this linear model of produce, use, and dispose. You can make your software more efficient, so you can run it for longer and on older devices. You can reuse the software, so that you can reuse devices with software in ways that it was never intended. You can take an old piece of hardware and do something new with it, like make a gaming console out of it. You can also recycle the software for new devices. There's a really good example with Asahi Linux, which are reverse engineering the M-series chips from Apple in order to run Linux on it. And they have taken the entire software stack of KDE so that they can run a fully functioning operating system on these brand new devices. And the reason that's possible is because the software is free software. They're allowed to do that. They can take it and use it in ways that maybe we never expected. And that means that when you go down that linear model, then you can use it for longer, use that hardware for longer, and reuse it in ways that was never intended. Proprietary software, by comparison, puts dependencies on all of those actions. You're dependent on the vendor in order to do that, which means you may not be able to use it for longer. You may not be able to reuse the device in ways that weren't intended, or recycle the software to do new things with it. So I'm getting now to the campaign that I would like to organize. And I would love it if everybody here gets involved. So who here is involved with a free software community? Who here is involved with a free software organization or development group? Okay. Who here is just a free software enthusiast? And who here would like to help people who may care about the environment understand that how they use their devices has an impact? I hope everyone? Okay, almost? Okay. So 14th of October 2025 is the end of support for Windows 10. This is going to mean for many users they're going to have a moment of friction in the usage of their device. They have a few options. In some cases, they can update to Windows 11. If they can't do that, they can hack their device to try to make it so they can update to Windows 11 anyway. There are ways to do that, but that creates other points of friction later on. They can pay, so normal users can pay a fee to have 1 year of extended support, and then they will be in the same situation again. Businesses and schools get up to 3 years. Or they can abandon Windows. And that's what I'm going to try to promote here. One thing that's really important is that Windows 11 is not going to support about 250 million devices. That means those devices are going to probably either continue to be used at a disadvantage to the user without getting security updates, or it's going to mean they end up as e-waste and new devices are produced, shipped unnecessarily, and then supporting Windows 11. And we can do something about that. Also, something about Windows 11 is that they're now integrating all these new anti-features, as many proprietary software products do, in which will increase the energy profile of that software. So now there's ads being integrated into the start menu, which are going to then increase the energy consumption of all those devices worldwide. So it's not just about the devices that are going to be e-waste, but it's also about the new devices that are now consuming more energy and requiring more powerful hardware for probably things that users don't want. 14th of October is also International E-Waste Day. It's almost a joke, but it's true. This is from the same We group. They, every year on 14th of October, organize various actions related to e-waste. And I think this is a good omen for us for a potential campaign. But it gets even better than that. 14th of October is also KDE's 29th birthday next year. In 1996, the first call for developers to work on KDE was sent out. And yeah, so we have, the stars are aligning, I think, for a really nice campaign to try to raise awareness about the issue of e-waste driven by software and maybe convince some people to try out Linux. So I'm up here coming from the KDE Eco Initiative. We're trying to focus on a lot of these things, but this campaign, I would really love to be something that comes from the ground up. I don't want this to be something that KDE Eco does and you join on, but rather that we organize together. So there's a planning BOF. This is the second in-person BOF for this campaign. The first one was in November at SFSCon in Bolzano to coordinate a campaign across free software communities worldwide. So I would love to invite all of you to come from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock on day 4, on Monday, to the Bits and Boima workshop area, which is just downstairs to the back there, and come organize with us. And right now I'm working with this working slogan, Hackers, Let's Help. One of the things that we talked about in the first BOF, which we still need to work out, is what exactly is our target audience for this campaign? And one inspiration for me is the Day We Fight Back protest. Who here remembers that campaign? Anyone? Okay, one person. So it was a protest that happened 10 years ago in 2014 to fight back against surveillance from the NSA in the wake of the Snowden revelations. And about 6,000 different organizations participated, and they put a banner on their website stating on this one day, sometime in February, we're sick and tired of surveillance, let's do something about it. So I was thinking it'd be nice if we could have some sort of unified voice from free software communities about the issue of software-driven e-waste and the environmental impact driven by software, where we can have across maybe our websites or in our materials, or if we have newsletters, where we have a moment where we try to send out to all of our users and followers, hey, this is an issue, we can do something about this. And one idea that we had in that first BOF is trying to target people who may be already a bit tech savvy, concerned about the environment, and willing to help others. So who here has helped their family or friends install Linux at some point? Yeah, so many of us here. Who here has had a good experience doing that? Yeah, so how many people, so in my experience, I helped my parents switch from Windows 7 to Linux about 6 years ago, and they have been happily using Linux since then, with very few problems. Occasionally there are problems, that's why it's good that there's someone who can help. So this initial idea is let's target this late teen, 20s group of people who might be tech savvy, concerned about the environment. Maybe they're involved in Fridays for Future or Extinction Rebellion or Last Generation. And let's get them motivated to help get the people in their lives who use Windows 10 to switch over to Linux before the end of life on 14th of October, 2025. So this is the first idea, but as I said, this should be something that comes from all of us, so come to the BOF, help us make this idea even better. and we can do something about this. You can also get involved by joining our team. We have at the repository starting to collect tasks to do related to this. Give your input. You don't have to just come to the BOF. You can also get involved online. We have materials which we are designing as part of a project in the a new project in the KDE Eco Initiative related to the environmental harm driven by software. I have some pamphlets here if you would like. They're, I think, beautifully designed, presenting the issues that we've talked about already, the CO2 emissions and device production, how does FOSS relate to this, as well as some information about how to install, or distributions to install to then use your devices for longer, including some information about the Blue Angel eco-label, which now certifies software as environmentally friendly. KDE is very proud that we certified our PDF reader, Ocular, in 2022, and you can get some more information there in this pamphlet. And we would love to design more materials like this, distribute them at events. You can come to our table downstairs and pick one up, or I can give you one afterwards. You can also distribute them in your communities. We have an idea of designing a user-friendly migration tool. This is really just a helping tool to help users who don't know Linux to decide which distribution they would like to use that meets their needs. This is very much at the beginning stages. We're going to do a Season of KDE project to develop this tool, which will run on a Windows machine or online at a website, and then guide people to decide, this is the right distribution for me, sort of hold their hand a little bit, and get them to hopefully a distribution that will work for them. This is something that has come up over and over for new users. I don't know which one to use. So this hopefully will help. As also part of this new KDE project, UpGreen, we're organizing workshops. This is also something we'd like to promote and organize coming up to the 14th of October. Workshops to help new users, installation workshops, but with a sustainability angle. Bring people in who might care about the environment, get them using their devices for longer. This is from our revamped eco website, eco.kde.org. Check it out. Building local networks of repair cafes. So Berlin is amazing. This is a list of repair cafes in Berlin, but trying to start to network these repair cafes that offer these services or don't offer them, and try to promote them, promote Linux installation as part of a repair cafe activity. So building networks, maybe in your community you have repair cafes, building those networks, making them part of the campaign of moving people to Linux as part of this Windows to Linux campaign. Also, if you're a software developer, you can measure the energy consumption of your software, start making this data available to users. This is a really important first step to understand what exactly the environmental impact of software is. KDE has started measuring its software in a lab in Berlin, which is now integrated with the GitLab repository. We can trigger a measurement process remotely, get a report back, and we've now started putting on our website information about how Ocular in particular, being eco-certified, is sustainable. We want to encourage other software developers to measure their software, make that data available, and also promote the ways that your software is sustainable. We have a handbook about this topic. You're welcome to read it. It goes over the issues in 3 parts. Including how to certify your software as environmentally friendly. First, why does this matter? 2, what is the Blue Angel? And 3, how do you then meet the criteria of the Blue Angel to certify software? There are other measurement tools out there. This is an example, Wattwiser, which is a new tool. It runs locally on your computer. It supports Windows and Linux. Mac is not supported yet. Another tool for Linux is Powerletrix. There will be a talk at FOSDEM in February about this tool. Also, just tools to measure energy consumption and give you an idea of how much energy your software consumes when it's being used. If we can be successful in this, it's good for the environment, and it's good for penguins in every sense, right? And it's good for GNUs, and it's good for geckos, and it's good for dragons, good for all of the other mascots that we have in the Linux world. I think this really is, that moment of friction that people have really is an opportunity to maybe get some people to try something new, and I think many people will be very happy once they do. If we can get them with the right software, I think we can really make an impact. We have a workshop tomorrow, a Bring It Back to Life. That's what we're starting to call these upcycling workshops. A kids addiction workshop to make Linux gaming devices for yourself or for your kids. Bring a laptop if you want to participate. We don't have many USB sticks. Unfortunately, the shipment didn't arrive before the event. So if you have, I have about 10. I think there's another 5 or so. So we have 15 USB sticks to start installing. If you want to bring your own, that would be great. We'll have some example computers you can look at. I have a computer from 2003, which runs actually really well. You can try it out. And you can put G-Compre on there. It's a kids game. Give it to your kids from 3 to 10. I have a device from 2009 running a Linux gaming specific distribution, which is also pretty cool. Come check it out and maybe install something of your own. You can learn more about the KDE Eco Initiative. There's a just published article in German in Linux Magazine about it, so check it out if you want to learn more about us. And just a final note that the project OptGreen for KDE Eco is funded by the German Environment Agency and the BMUV, and we're very thankful for that funding. So thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. We will now take questions from you. Any questions? Raise your hand. Yep.
Hi, yeah, thanks for your talk. Very interesting. It was a subject that interested me a lot, even from beforehand. And I'm wondering if this alternative of switching to Linux is very realistic in many cases. I'm thinking of, for example, my mom back in Romania. She's a doctor, a general practitioner, and I was just talking to her about this thing. Yeah, they use software that just isn't written for Linux. So there are solutions for that. You could use Wine or whatever, but yeah, I could help, but many other doctors don't have that help. So the option is to pay someone, but then again, they're severely underpaid already. So yeah, their only solution would be to just fork over the money, upgrade the hardware, and throw the old stuff away. So what comes to mind is what the European Union did with Apple products, making them switch to USB-C. Wouldn't you think that some sort of political pressure on vendors to, I don't know, lower their hardware requirements, maybe pushing out like lightweight versions of their OSs would be a better, a more, I don't know, realistic solution?
So maybe a couple of comments to the first part of that question. We have done a few workshops now and really trying to do outreach with end users that they're not necessarily interested in Linux, they're just interested in using their devices for longer. So they're coming into this really with little information about Linux. And I found that there's sort of 2 groups that are particularly open to switching, and it's people who are retired and people who aren't yet in a career. And I think it's exactly for that reason, because there's a lot of software that people get dependent on, which is needed for their career, or they feel they need it for their career, and it's very hard for them to switch if they think that particular software is necessary, and therefore, if Linux doesn't support it, they can't. So this interesting observation that I found, these are the groups that really were happy to switch over and then use it, as opposed to this sort of between 25 and 65. We're a much harder group because they usually have very particular needs. One of the things that I've done when talking about particular software products is think about the functionality that they need, not necessarily the product. So talking with people about if they need photo editing, they may not need that particular proprietary software product. They just might need something that does photo editing. Of course, that means there's a learning curve. But if you can identify the functionality they need, at least you can then start to provide some alternatives and talk about it in that way instead of a particular software. But yes, Would it be better to do political pressure? I would say both and. I mean, we need a public support for these kinds of measures and these kinds of regulations. So I think there is a need to get people aware of these issues so that there is political pressure, and there's only so much we can do. So I would love it if someone does do that kind of lobbying, perhaps FSFE or other sort of lobbying groups that do political campaigns. Perhaps we can coordinate something and put some more pressure from a government side in regulating these things.
Yeah, hi. So my question would be that the compatibility with what we have on, let's say, Windows, the entire Office suite, many times we see with LibreOffice and other tools, they are not one-to-one compatible, right? The issue would be that, let's say, a normal retired person, of course, can use that, but let's suppose there's a legal document in doc and somebody tries to open that legal document in LibreOffice, let's say, and something breaks, right? So people are scared now, they won't risk their business or any legal decision because of this incompatibility. And it's also debated why we can't have a one-to-one compatibility. It's not that, let's say, that LibreOffice is bad and all. It's a conscious decision on their side to not, let's say, be a one-to-one map to something proprietary from Windows. So I think this kind of a gap somehow we need to close if we want these kinds of endeavors to be successful, to get out of that ideology that something is proprietary, we will not follow them. Otherwise, it's very difficult to convince people to move to the free open source version.
So luckily, from what I understand, Microsoft has filled that gap themselves by making a web-based version of Microsoft Word. And if it's web-based, from what I understand, that should work fine on Linux. I don't have any experience with this. It works. So that particular example may have already been successfully resolved by having a web-based version of their software. Another thing just to comment on that is nice about the Blue Angel criteria for eco-certifying software is one of the criteria is support for open data formats. And it's exactly for this kind of compatibility thing that you can get locked into a particular software product because of the data format itself, and trying to make a more holistic understanding of what a sustainable, environmentally sustainable software ecosystem looks like includes being able to switch software products because one software product consumes more energy, right? And just a note about the issue of interoperability in data formats. I think it's an interesting and a nice aspect of the Blue Angel eco-label.
We'll take a question online.
A question from the internet. Do you have estimations for the e-waste pile caused by mobile devices? I noticed mostly from your questions that most frequent e-wastes are Apple iPhones. Are there any projects to bring those back to life?
So Apple smartphones cannot be brought back to life because their bootloaders are locked down, and there's no way to boot an alternative operating system. This is something that I think there should be a political pressure to, if Apple doesn't support or any company stops supporting a piece of hardware, it should be at least possible to boot something else on that hardware. I think this is something that, to me, is an obvious thing to regulate. But so Apple iPhones, we can't do anything with. At some of our upcycling workshops, we've had people who can help with smartphone upcycling for Android or other smartphones that allow booting for alternative operating systems. But it's something that we don't offer at every workshop. It's something we would like to offer, but there are alternatives out there, and some are actually very usable for end users, the lineage derivatives, for example.
We will take a question from the middle.
Hi. So this is thinking more about the BOF on Monday, but what are some of the most immediate things that you need help with to get the Windows 10 to Linux upcycling campaign off the ground? What kind of things are you looking for? What kind of support do you need? Is there a way that people who are not programmers, for instance, can get involved? What would be the most useful?
So I think having a website for this campaign would be very useful, and that's something that can be done soon, and hopefully then be a central place. I want it to be something that's neutral, because I want this to be a free software community project, so I don't think it's appropriate to put it as a KDE Eco website, but rather a neutral website. So that would be something. Design of materials as a non-coding type thing would be very helpful. I think anything that helps users migrate, so something like this tool, if you are a developer and want to work on a tool like this, I think that would be very helpful, or help with the website aspect of this kind of tool. So I would say those are maybe 3 things that would be good. But the most important thing is, if you're involved in free software, come to the BOF and start helping out to get this project off the ground.
Question from the front, and then another one from online.
Sorry, I missed parts of the talk. I hope I don't double any question. I'm working in a German school, and I'm fighting for open software using there. And it's really a fight, because on a daily basis things are getting worse. We have this monstrum money-burning machine called Digitalpakt. So a lot of money is put into schools, and in terms of things getting worse, they're not even buying Windows, but Apple. We have whole classes using Apple iPads, and I'm fighting to connect them to the smart boards, and unfortunately, they do work better than everything else. I tried an Android tablet. I'm now ending up with a Linux tablet. The only solution I found was a ResPad toolkit from China. I built it, but it's not a tablet. So my question is, why isn't there no initiative to put free software, free hardware into schools while there's the money? A lot of people are paying. It just have to work. And it's very frustrating on a daily basis to learn that my technology, my free software, my Debian, even my Android tablet is not working as well as the Apple tablets. And it's shocking to learn that the whole schools are getting all the Apple stuff.
Yeah.
Even worse than Windows for me.
So it's a great question. I think schools are actually a perfect environment for this kind of message. In many cases, they have devices just from the past. They accumulate over time. In many cases, they don't have a big budget. And we can kind of get in there and potentially offer something, but we need to offer the right thing. I know there are projects like Primtux, which is a French-based project. I think the Framasoft people are involved with it, trying to make a software stack just for educational purposes based on Linux. I think things like that are good. There's the Cyber for EDU downstairs that I wanted to talk to at some point. But I think that's a really good use case that would be important to target. Then talk with us, and let's see if we can do something. And I know we have KDE contributors who are, for example, the gcompree developers are mostly teachers. Many of them are not developers that are contributing to this software stack. And perhaps there's people in our community that can help out in your community, and maybe we can make some networks there to try to target. And we have done a couple of upcycling workshops in schools already, and there's definitely a lot of interest in Hanover in particular. So perhaps we can figure out something that could be beneficial to both of us. Welcome.
Well, there's another question from the internet. How can monopolies like Autodesk be coaxed to release Linux versions on their software? AutoCAD is one of these softwares that is a big argument against switching to Linux.
I don't have an answer to that. Does anyone have an answer or an idea of how we can? So FreeCAD, there's so maybe alternatives, but is there a way we can? So I've also had this problem where someone says, I would love to use Linux, but I need X software. It doesn't run it. How do we change that? I don't know. I mean, part of it is if we get enough people using Linux, maybe they'll start to feel that they need to support Linux. But yeah, Kieran? So flood them with complaints or support tickets of why can't I use this on a device on my operating system? Yeah. Say it again. or have more successful alternatives like Blender or FreeCAD was an example here. Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that. So,
Last question? No, I guess everything has been cleared up. You are enthusiastic enough to join Joseph
I have a question
in
for
his
you
quest?
all.
Okay.
Who's going to come to the BOF on Monday? Raise your hand. Some people here. Okay, good. Yeah, come. I'm holding you to it.
Thank you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you all.